Hello, welcome everyone. It's so great to have all of you here. I'm really excited for this program. It's a conversation that we honestly can't get enough of. And I posted something about this on LinkedIn this week. I find that whenever people are think that, everything's fine, that we're making so much progress, I just flip the script. And so my post on LinkedIn was imagine, and I'm forgetting all the numbers now. Imagine it's, 55% of law school graduates are men and only 22% are law firm partners, and only 38% are in-house counsel, general counsel, and only 2% are patent agents. No one would be okay with that, right? And that's actually where it stands for women. And so while we can say that we have made progress, yes, it's not enough and it's not fast enough and it's not acknowledging the brilliance that is in the room and the possibility and what's possible in innovation. Really, we're leaving talent on the side. So I am really excited to welcome you all to this program to really talk about what matters and to really create space for discussion around barriers and solutions to retaining and advancing women in IP. So ChIPs is a nonprofit organization representing more than now about 8,000 members and 31 regional chapters across North America, Europe, Latin America, Asia Pacific, and Africa. And we accelerate innovation through the diversity of thought, participation, and engagement. So please do use the chat to share any questions you might have or any comments. We're here to welcome in all voices. I'm just thrilled to be joined by Diversity Pilots, which is a group of researchers that works with firms and organizations to advance diversity and inclusion and innovation by coupling our understanding of institutional details and dynamics associated with patenting, law firm advancement, and innovation processes with econometric and social science approaches. And here to start the introductions, I'll let each of our incredible speakers introduce themselves, starting with Colleen Chen, who's the founder of Diversity Pilots Initiative.
Thanks so much, Monica. It's a pleasure to be here on this webinar and to be able to sort of take some time just to talk about this important topic. The Diversity Pilots Initiative is a group of researchers, as Monica mentioned, that partners with companies and organizations to help them think about what are the types of experiments they might want to try, what initiatives are they launching, and how well are they performing. I think many people recognize the importance of diversity and the desire to have, as Monica mentioned, everyone's full talent be utilized. But when we do programs, we don't know if they work or not. And so that's where we as researchers come in, having a similar interest and motivation, and really feel like the science can help uncover insights then that are going to help you have those hard conversations about, well, we want to justify changing the program or introducing a new program. What is the ROI on it? And so that's where we're just thrilled to be able to partner with ChIPs to do some baseline work to try to understand where people are at. I want me to turn it over now I'll go to Lena.
Yeah, let's have Lena.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for including me in this panel. My name is Lena. I am a senior counsel at Perkins. I focus on intellectual property, in particular patent prosecution and trademarks. I've been there for 10 years. And I graduated from Santa Clara while Professor Chen was there. Um, Before I went to law school, I worked as a software engineer at Pixar for 10 years on various movies like Incredibles, Wall-E, Ratatouille, Brave. And I worked as an inventor, and now I switched sides and I'm working as a patent attorney with inventors to secure patents for them. I'll turn it over to Gail.
Hello, and thank you so much for inviting me. My name is Gail Tisek. I'm the Chief IP Counsel for Abbott Labs based in Chicago. And it's very interesting to look these surveys over time because I just realized that this is 40 years since I graduated from my engineering school undergrad with 2 whole women in my graduating class. So, especially looking at these surveys that were done is how people feel like these changes have had. I've got kind of a long runway of that. So very interesting conversation. So thank you so much. I guess I will pass it to Jason.
Well, yeah, so also joining us is Jason Sandvik, who's Assistant Professor of Finance at University of Arizona. and Margot Bagley, who's Asa Griggs Candler Professor of Law at Emory University School of Law, both of whom are also, Margot Bagley is a Diversity Pilots Initiative principal, and Jason Sandvik is a Diversity Pilots Initiative researcher. So I believe that Jason is here and can come off mute to say a few words.
Yeah. I'm so sorry for not having my video on. I'm en route to the airport, but I'm really happy to be here. I'm really excited to hear all the things that everyone has to share. Colleen will be largely sharing the initiatives that I've been a part of. So thank you all so much for having me, and I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. And Margot will join us if she is able. She's also in transit. So let me show the slides. Put this on. Right. Is that
Yeah,
it?
we mentioned that Margot and Jason helped with this initiative, with the initiative to kind of carry out the survey. And so I'm speaking on their behalf this morning. Margot is also an inventor as well as a law professor. So she just has really deep insights. I myself, oh, it looks like she's coming back. I myself was also an engineer before I became a law professor and at Berkeley Law School. Margot, we were just talking about how you are an inventor as well as a law professor. I don't know if you want to just introduce yourself briefly. Okay, it looks like there might be some audio issues, so we can just go ahead, and when she comes back in, if she wants to pop in, then she can.
Yeah, so let's talk about why this study was done, Colleen, Professor Chen.
Oh, sure. So, I mean, I think ChIPs is an organization. I've been so happy to be part of it really since the beginning. And it's a place where women can get together, talk about, learn about each other's areas of focus, and then really just connect with other people and find mentors, frankly, right? And connect with others, whether it's through the experiences that you're having and other places, what it might be like to work in, sort of get to the highest echelons of the IP field, right? In terms of the founders of ChIPs, but also just to share experiences. And so when Joan and I talked, I think I was going to speak at the conference in 23 now, or 24, the winter of 23, actually. We thought, well, while we are actually talking, it would be interesting to figure out what's going on and take the pulse of all the members, because members talk to each other, they get a sense of how things are going within organizations, but we don't have a really big bird's eye view of how the field is feeling about organizations like ChIPs or diversity efforts within firms or within companies. And so Joan, I think, had seen another study that was very influential in another industry. And she said, is this something that we could collaborate on? So we were thrilled to roll up our sleeves and get a bunch of questions onto a survey. As it was launched as part of the global conference, we were overwhelmed by how much engagement we got. We had hundreds of responses, and we're able to really get this collective wisdom from the group.
Yes. So like Colleen said, that 374 ChIPS members completed the survey, 206 worked in-house at corporations and other organizations, and 168 worked at law firms. And here's some just additional research to kind of support where we were at the time of this survey in the industry as a profession. Just 21% of patent lawyers and 33% of IP lawyers are women.
Sorry, Monica. Can you increase the size of the slides? Because right now, the
Oh,
view
is
that
it
we have is
not?
click to add notes.
Oh, okay. Let me
think, Monica, if you choose use slideshow.
how's
There
that?
it
Oh,
is.
there.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Thank
now we
you
can
for
see
letting me
it
know.
well.
Okay, so I'll go back one. Okay, so that's the intro. There we go. Good. And only 93% of what their male counterparts do. So some progress. Yes, this is great. We are making progress. People want to do better. Organizations want to engage and invest in their talent, and we need to do more. Just 38% of women are associate GCs and 40% assistant GCs. 23% of patent applications, only 21.9% in the US. I think that's really interesting that there are more globally than in the US.
Right. And
Where
I was going to just comment that if you look at the actual number of inventors, right? So that's lowest on a patent application, but I think what's really stark is it's only 13% of inventors that are women, even though 27% of the STEM workforce is women. So we're seeing already a drop off there as well.
Right. So here's just a chart to visualize that data that we just shared. And Again, like it sounds all right, right? But if you said that the majority of people graduating law school are men and they're holding a minority of senior positions, we would start to wonder why. So we really need to be paying attention to this and wondering what is actually happening in those numbers. And what I love about this study that Diversity Pilots and the team ran with ChIPs is it really gets into what is causing some of that attrition, where we're seeing um, the women go and how they're connecting to organizations like ChIPs. So, any comments, Colleen?
Well, I think the statistics you're showing, I mean, we might want to pause on them a little bit. Those are from, I'm assuming you pulled them from other places, but we have folks on this call who have been both in engineering environments and also in law firm environments. So if we want to go back to, we kind of look at the contrast here, right? I think it's notable that general counsel shares are 38%. It's not that the attrition there is not that great in terms of looking at assistant general counsel's associates. We're going from 40 to 38. So to me, that's a pretty good conversion rate. As compared to, for example, the conversion of STEM workers to inventors. And I'd be interested in, you've got like other people on the call who have been in both settings. What's going right on if we want to talk about the GC, the company side with this conversion, and what can we learn with respect to the higher conversion here as compared to, for example, the STEM workforce to inventor pipeline.
Any thoughts from the panel?
I just from like the STEM workforce to the inventor pipeline, and I've studied that within my own company. We actually have 41% of our STEM workforce is women, and 27% of our inventors are women. And we're finding that even though that STEM workforce is higher, the women are not in R&D, which is where most of the inventions come from. So we have women in STEM roles, but they're in quality, they're in regulatory, they're in clinical roles. We're still not seeing, the women in the hard R&D where more of the inventions come from. That's what I've been finding. And so we've been trying to do things like when we do brainstorming sessions in R&D, pulling in some of the women from quality and pulling in some of the clinical people and putting them on those brainstorming teams to try to make, get them more as inventors, because they're not, as much in those hard R&D groups. The actual percentages in R&D are almost matching our number of inventors. So I don't know what anybody else is seeing in that, but.
Yeah, I think that's
Sorry, I was just going to say, yeah, I would actually agree with that. When I was at Pixar, I was working very closely with R&D, kind of incorporating the inventions in R&D into the pipeline, and we had a good synergy. And that's where the most of the inventions came from. So it was the R&D work with the R&D group. Yep.
And I thought it was just really interesting. And another paper out of the Diversity Pilots Initiative has tried to really track what's happening. And I think, like you're mentioning, inviting people from different groups so that you have that diverse perspective in the room when you're doing a brainstorming session is something that some companies are experimenting with. I think one of the issues comes back to sort of what you mentioned. Is there a selection into the quality role, or is it because the qualifications need to be quite different in order to do the quality role versus be in the hardcore R&D? Because one of the issues, I think, we kind of think about what Kathy Vidal has mentioned before, is ensuring that we're really creating an equal opportunity, that the R&D positions are equally attractive to women, and whether there are differences with lifestyle or other aspects that might deter women to potentially to be in the harder science areas within the company. But I don't know if you have any sense of that.
Yeah, Gail.
Oh, sorry. I mean, I think to me, again, it comes down to, is who is that leadership? And that's, some of the questions in your survey of seeing leadership, of seeing people that you're comfortable with, that you like, that still more of that R&D leadership is men. And where in like a quality, regulatory, clinical, it's more mixed. And so it's just, you're going to find like you could more likely have a mentor in the quality area, or you're going to have people that you just see in that area, visibility, representation. I think it's just, in a way, it's more comfortable. And my daughter has a master's in engineering and she works in quality. And so, because that's kind of where she just felt a better fit in that area. And so, I think it's building up, that representation in R&D to make women feel more comfortable there.
I hear this a lot, and it kind of makes me cringe when I hear it, which is, well, do women want those jobs, right? And it's a fair question, but so often we're taught to do good work, work a lot, put our heads down, and people will pick us. And that is not how it works at all. We know that. In the General Counsel Boot Camp in ChIPs, we're actively working on helping women stand up, speak up, step forward, so that they can actually be in those positions. I see Margot wants to contribute. I'll just share. Dr. Ruthie Lyle has joined us for ChIPs programs, and she shares that she was actively selected to join a team to work on a patent. And then she became one of the most prolific women inventors of this time, right? Because someone asked her to join the team. That's how it works. Margot?
Thanks. And I just wanted to agree with all that's been said about the importance of R&D. That's where I started. I started in R&D at Procter & Gamble. And, having the mindset that I was hired to invent was helpful. And then being involved in obtaining a patent got me interested in intellectual property and ultimately going into patent law. So I think that, but I don't know that I was, but it was certainly very much a male-dominated environment, and I cannot say I had any really senior, or not in my area, women role models to look to in R&D at that time. So yeah, it's an important observation, and making sure that there are the incentives for women to take that route, I think is important.
Thank you, Professor Bagley. Lena?
The other thing that I experienced and talking to other women inventors at Pixar, one comment was, well, there were no incentives. So if you're not in R&D, filing for a patent, even though you actually did invent something, what would take time, and it wasn't properly incentivized at the company. So even if you're outside of R&D, if the company has proper incentive structures for inventors, you could incentivize women to file for patents and to submit patents, etc. Because there is some overhead. You have to describe your invention. You have to go through the legal department. They have to approve it. Then you have to talk to the lawyer. Then you have to review the application. And so all of that takes time away from your engineering job, which is already very demanding. So if there were some monetary incentives or recognition of these efforts, I think that would be helpful even for non-R&D jobs.
A really good point. Yeah. I'm going
I
to.
think that the elephant in the room is the pool of women is so small. I mean, you said, I don't know who said it, but their daughter went, into something different, even though, that was you, Gail. They go into something different. I have 3 kids. My 2 girls, they both went the science route, but one's a nurse and one's going to medical school. And even that, the one that's in medical school, the advisor was telling her that she didn't have the chops to do medical school and that she wasn't going to get accepted. And, it was incredible. But the thing is that there's, at the very beginning, women are being told that they can't do these things still today. They're being told that they can't do them. And the few women that do make it have a myriad of options because people do want the women, but there's just so few of them that they may or may not go into the fields that are available or that we want them to go into to be able to like get to the GC level. So it's a conundrum, really. Like it has to start at the beginning. It's just
I feel this deeply. Is it Lisi?
Lisi, it's Lisi.
Lisi. Thank you for that. I was a physics major in 1991. I didn't know that was the path for me until I won a couple of awards in high school. And then I decided to pursue that in college. I was one of two women in physics. I switched to journalism. My first year of college showed me that I didn't really want that. And I was growing a lot as a person. I was 17, but my one lab professor in my one physics class my freshman year said, "You belong here." Right. And he was really fantastic at helping showing me, but in all of the other spaces, I did not feel like I belonged there. And it was a battle, it was a constant battle of trying to prove that I actually could do this work, that I could show up, that I could do it. And then I started thinking, like, do I even want to do this work? Right. And it's exhausting to hear that that still happens today. So that's why we're
right?
having this conversation. We have to change that narrative, and we need the men in the room to be advocating and advising. That lab professor that I had was the father of a daughter who I then later met as a young woman in Washington, D.C. He was raising strong women.
I just want you to know that I coached the soccer team, and I think four of the girls that I coached are engineers, and maybe five, and three of them are in patent law.
Nice. And
That's the
all of
thing.
you
I
are real
encourage
models.
them.
Yeah. And all of you are real models of how to be that, right? Professor Chen?
Oh, no, it's just going to say that all this resonates. Myself, I was an engineer as an undergrad, but then yes, there are different options you have after that, and sort of going what resonates with you is, I think, we want to honor that as well. But this is, I think trying to figure out this issue, right? These very subtle differences, whether it's sort of the messages you hear or it's the kind of representation, it all adds up, right? So that there is this sort of beginning. We all start out, we know that talent is equally distributed, and sort of in high school, the scores between girls and boys are pretty close, right? But then selecting into the major, getting the major, but even once you get to the place of work, then I think, ChIPs is very instrumental in trying to figure out how do we make sure that people thrive once they're there, right? And so I think I'm still encouraged by the general counsel conversion that the assistant to associate to general counsel pipeline is like that looks to be quite robust. And so I think, what I think is useful here is to try to focus on what is working as well, so that we can try to take those lessons into these different realms.
Right. So I really like what our executive director, Joan Toth, has said here in this study, that ChIPs members have witnessed positive changes, but only 6% of in-house respondents and 14% of law firm respondents rate their workplace very good when it comes to creating career opportunities. And we see that here. And why are we seeing that? Well, we've noticed that what is keeping them from staying in the workplace is attitude toward women in the last 5 years is getting better. But then, sorry, I'm moving through the slide. I can't see on my slide because it's too little, so I have to look to the side. Is it advancing?
Yes, this
Yes.
one is around opportunities for career advancement.
Okay, okay.
It looks
Great.
like the legal industry's attitudes towards women.
Yes, yeah. So it's getting better, right? And we see here retaining a diverse workforce is increasing. So what is actually keeping them out? And this is what's the slide I was trying to get to. What would cause you to consider leaving a workplace? Lack of proper management support, lack of leadership, bias in favor of men, lack of flexible work environment. And this on the left is in-house counsel, and on the right is in the law firm. So actually very similar in both environments. And then if we go to the next one, how beneficial has your relationship with your most effective mentor been to your professional development and career
Sorry,
development?
Monica. I just on the previous slide, I thought it was interesting. Yes, it is very similar in both environments, except lack of mentorship and sponsorship, which is much larger in law firms. And I like having been in a law firm for 10 years, I could completely relate to that. So
What's
I
so interesting about that, though, is that we actually find more mentoring opportunities in the law firms.
oh,
Yeah. So I'd love to hear more about that. That's this next slide, I think, is that we all know that it matters a lot, but then where are the mentors? And I think law firms have institutionalized this where they have a program in place to create mentor opportunities, but then in-house counsel don't actually have the robust team to create the mentoring process to institutionalize it. Gail,
so
you're
these are contradictory. These are contradictory indicators. Interesting. Okay.
Well,
well,
no, I think this is such an interesting conversation. I'm so glad that we have all of our personal experiences as well to kind of bring into it. I think like we can talk about, there's a lot of things to talk about in this slide, but I think one thing that would, to me, reconcile the two kind of apparently conflicting ideas, one being that law firms are better or worse. It's more pointed that people can't get the mentorship they need, but they haven't had as much trouble finding mentors. I mean, I feel like in the law firm, because your billables, your sponsorship, what you bring in is so important to your evaluation.
Mhm.
Having those relationships and being able to cultivate that business ends up being really important to your performance and then how well you do. So you might have a mentor, maybe they're not like as effective, but law firms, you might have a mentor, but that doesn't
Oh,
necessarily
mentoring name, you mean?
effective.
Like,
Right. You might have find an effective mentor who really helped you get to that next stage. I mean, I do think that there's so much in this, the questions that you guys wanted to put on. If we go back to the one around the things that aren't, making people leave, if you're gonna go back to slides,
oh,
if we can or not.
there we go.
I mean, I'd be very interested in the other panelists' sense of the extent to which, this is true within, what are the differences that you see within the places? What do you see in terms of the general trends? And then how much does this translate into the corporate environment? Because I think what we found in our work, we at the Diversity Pilots Initiative, Jill Grennan and I, we surveyed, I think about 4,000 engineers, and we asked them similar questions around what were the things that supported and worked in favor of you participating in inventing. It's a little bit of a different question, but one thing that came out very clearly there was that management matters so much. And here you again also see that for people making decisions about whether it's, kind of go for the promotion or not, but here the particular question is around leaving a workplace. Management is a very key factor. And the good thing about that is, again, that's coachable. That's something that could be changed and considered. But I'd be interested in, if we have time, to just like reflect a little bit on what people see here, if this kind of resonates with what you're seeing in the law firm context, or maybe also in the corporate setting, for Lena and Gail.
yeah, I think in terms of law firm setting, I think your explanation is completely correct in the sense that you can get assigned a mentor. And at Perkins, you get assigned when you come in, you get assigned two mentors, like an associate mentor and a responsible partner. Um, and and they do even incentivize it, which I do appreciate. They pay for weekly lunches. So if you take your mentee out to lunch, it's covered by the firm. And you can take them to fancy lunches too. It's like $50 per person. So I take full advantage of that as a responsible partner for my mentee, and we have a great relationship. So my mentee is not going to leave the law firm because of lack of mentorship and sponsorship. But I do think, as you said, Colleen, that you're evaluated in a law firm, you're evaluated on the number of hours that you work, on your how much money you bring in, how much business you bring in. And that definitely limits how much time you have to devote to a mentoring relationship. And I think from what I've heard from my mentee, for example, he has two mentors, but he only sees me. He doesn't see the other one. He doesn't see the associate mentor. So yeah, there's that. I think basically your understanding of the data fits my experience.
And I think this data goes together. I mean, the proper management support and the proper mentor support, because if the management is saying mentoring is important, and then, and they're formalizing it, I mean, my company, I mean, it's formal. We have people that are assigned to us, and it is an expectation by our leadership that we meet with them regularly. And if, and sometimes, you don't click, or there's not, that you find somebody else that you work with them to, that I've had other people come to me and say, hey, I have this mentor assigned to me, it's not working out. We can't quite click. And I've taken on others, but it's, I think that leadership support is really key, that the company has to, from a corporate, has to value that and has to invest in it and invest the time that, and telling people that this is part of how you're going to be measured, is that you are bringing on, that next generation. And it's all part of, succession planning and all those types of things, is that mentoring, is developing the next generation of leadership. And the company support for that is really key. So, those just go together to me.
The other thing I think we could be seeing in this data is that in the law firms, associates and younger partners expect mentorship. So if they didn't have it, they might consider leaving. Whereas in-house, maybe there's just no protocol for having that. So they don't consider it as high of a priority for leaving. And they don't expect their workplace to give them leadership training. They haven't seen, participation or their perception of the legal industry change. So they're not needing that from their workplace maybe as much, as one way to, interpret that data.
I would be curious. I'm going to channel Jason a little bit. I know he's in transit on the assignment. How do you figure out who gets assigned to which mentor? Because that's an interesting question, and something that we asked a bunch of other questions on the survey, which we haven't yet sort of put out in the world, but that was one of the questions as well, is like, how do people get paired up within your settings?
And if Lena, you want to jump in, or?
How do people? Uh, so they, I think there, I think there is some, I think there's some randomness. Uh, but I've had very successful pairings, and I think the factors that they consider is gender, similar educational background, and prior like social engagement, because we bring in people from summer associates into the law firm, and then so they kind of know how much you interacted with them when they were summer associates, and then if you had a good relationship, then they assign you as a mentor when they come in as first year associates. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention is what Monica said, kind of going off what Monica said. Correct me if I'm wrong, but my thinking is that the people that we get in the law firms tend to be younger, right? They are the people out of law school who start working for us, and then after they get some experience, they go in-house. And I think for the younger people, the mentorship is more important than for more experienced people.
Right. And they might be finding mentors outside of their role when they get to the in-house counsel role, because they don't necessarily want to rely on someone within their organization as much as they want the feedback from people outside of their organization. Is that what you're noticing, Gail?
Yes, that's exactly what we're noticing. That's what I mean, we deliberately try to do when, Colleen's question about, how it gets paired up. It's actually to make sure somebody is not sort of in your chain of command. And, that who you're paired with is somebody who is, has significant experience and such, but is not, somebody that's your boss's boss or something like that, that, that you can talk to someone, that you can talk to them more freely. And so that's a lot of what we look for.
And do you think Abbott is unusual in how much attention it pays to mentoring? It was interesting, again, if we go forward in the slides, to see that real divide between law firms and in-house, with how hard it is to find a mentor. Here, again, you see the value of mentoring, right? That it's really effective. It's, sort of most people chose that highest category. And that it is coming from primarily not your outside network. So like I had this kind of hypothesis, well, I have some mentors, I would consider them peer mentors, that I have formed in my law school, and we chat all the time and we kind of talk about things. There's been some empirical work done on MBA graduates and their peer groups, and how a lot of women MBAs may make the transition into higher leadership, but partly that's because they can get some help and support from their cohort, right? So if they were in a cohort of MBA students that had more women, they could have these kind of relationships and discussions around, well, that's a good firm. That's a firm that is one where it's female friendly, and they really want to promote women. And so that made actually a tangible difference. So I thought law school would be higher on the list, and I was surprised to see that it wasn't. It was there pretty high for a law firm. It wasn't quite as high for in-house. But I guess the next slide is the most striking sort of difference in terms of how difficult is it. Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe right before this one. Yes, the difficulty finding a mentor. So with nearly 64% of in-house people saying it's hard to find a mentor, is that because they don't all have programs like Abbott Labs where there's, sort of a formalized structure?
I mean, I think that's part of it is, again, as it goes back to that leadership to culture. And I, spent my career basically at my legal career at 3 different corporations. And, my last one, I did a lot of comparisons of companies, of, their diversity, of the programs, of the public statements. And Abbott was always at the top of those numbers. And it was funny because it was basically the only company I would have ever left and got my last job and gone to. Because I think a lot of that is other companies that don't have formal systems don't have that. It's not encouraged to make time for it. I mean, it's part of my goals that are given. I have certain goals that are given to me, that this is my goal, and that is part of one of my goals is that company. And I've never had that at any other company. So I think that that's why that makes the difference. Is you've got to have that leadership has to make that part of the executives' goals of the company. And Abbott definitely does that.
So I'm going to stop sharing the slides unless you want me to keep them up. Just let me know. And then I'd love to just get into the questions a little bit more. Professor Chen, we see IP law falls behind in gender equity, and we're talking about how we change that. Does the data identify any ways that we can kind of approach this situation?
I think that there's work that has been done on this survey, and then also others looking at kind of this attrition question, right? And it's a big issue. It's like we see in law schools, we've got, over 50% of our incoming class at Berkeley Law is women. And even, I don't know if we've segmented the data by IP, but we have a very robust pipeline of people. And I can think about all the women that I went to law school with and who's still at the firm, right? It's a very small percentage. So I think one of the open questions around the law firm question, right, is like people start in law, they don't end up in law. Is that a push or is that a pull, right? Is it because I'm more interested in being in-house, or I want to start my own thing, or I want to work in the government? Or is it really that it became really impossible for me to do all the things I wanted to and be at this firm still? So I think that's actually an open question that we don't have an answer to. I think Margot and Jason and I are very interested in that question and trying to do some work on that. I know Goodwin Liu is doing some work as well that's based on surveys. And so that's one question. And then it's about, well, if you do want to stay, what are the things that are necessary to help you be successful? And, I think every firm is interested in that. Nobody wants to lose talent. They, invest so much in developing human capital, and then for people to leave when it's, not in the interest of the firm, that's a really big question. So I think I would like to present actually a little bit of data on some of the study that Jason, Jill, and I more recently did within a company. But I think this is why we need science to kind of look at these initiatives and to share information, right? This is why we formed the Diversity Pilots Initiative. We have companies, and we can easily do this with law firms, and we'd love to do that. Share their information. Like, this is when we instituted the program. This is what we've seen. And then if we pool that across a larger enough group, then we can actually see patterns to say, yeah, that one-on-one mentoring is really important. And voluntary programs are just as effective as mandatory ones, right? That's a big question in the research as well. And Jason has done a lot of studies in settings that are outside the law that might be, sort of in other work environments. And he's looked at these specific questions around voluntary participation in programs versus mandatory, and what the implications of those are. So I don't know if that gives very many answers, but it just, I think, builds the case for studying this more rigorously. Because if firms are putting resources into this, it's obviously very important to them how their talent, what's working and what isn't. And so then that's, I think, the case for doing more rigorous work here.
I love this conversation. I invited Gail and Lena because I know how much they've put into mentoring and creating opportunities through ChIPs and otherwise. Gail and I, a few years ago, did a LinkedIn Live on her work at Olympus. So I'm familiar with how she's intentionally created those spaces. And I'd love to kind of dig into the research you have here, Colleen, on small scale mentoring, large scale innovation.
Great. And I think Jason is on the call. So if he wants to say anything or even talk through these, I'm happy to have him do so. But otherwise, I'll just represent the group. And what I want to say is, even before we get here, is if we think about the initial slide deck, right, this question of how do I find a mentor? How do I make sure that they're doing enough as a firm leader? How do I make sure my mentors are correctly supported? It doesn't have to only be through a long-term mentoring program. There can also be shorter-term bursts. And what we studied here in particular was a very structured sort of 6-month period, I think it was, of working with a cohort of mentees and mentors to really figure out how do we actually help people come up the curve with respect to inventing, right? And so if we want to think about, like, just before we even get into the details of this study, what's an important thing for the job, right? It's to come up with great ideas if you're an engineer, and to turn those into products that turn into revenue and then improve people's lives. In the law firm, it might be business development or getting really efficient at prosecuting patents or working really well. So there's these skills that you need to unlock, and they're hard. They're not things that there's sort of a stepwise a session you go through. They need to be kind of communicated in different ways. So inventing might be like that too, right? As Lena said, it's not necessarily something that you automatically do. It will be part of the culture. Maybe you might be picked or tapped on the shoulder. You might otherwise learn about it through water cooler discussion. So here we're trying to really think about how do we get people up the curve, right? And can mentoring be effective? And even can small scale mentoring be effective? So in this case, we're focusing on human capital, and you can just kind of go through. So we have the whole slide here. What we really want to focus on, again, is what we call this innovator-inventor gap, right? That a large percentage of STEM workers are women, but only a small percentage are inventors. Small percentage of inventors are women and racial minorities, right? And so that's even a more kind of distinct gap. 9% of the educated STEM workers working in STEM are racial minorities, but only 1% of inventors are racial minorities. So the question is, again, what's the obstacle here? And so we kind of came up with different theories here, but even simple things like what's the bureaucracy required? What are all the time commitments involved? And how do you get help? And how do you just even know that this is a worthwhile thing to do? These are things that have been identified in the literature as important in other contexts. And that's Jason's done some of that work. Next slide, please. So what do? We worked with a particular firm. This is how a diversity pilots initiative works. That itself is a superstar firm, 25,000 plus engineers. They did their own mentorship program to address their own innovator-inventor gap. So kind of what Gail saw happening at Abbott. Company after company we've talked to have seen this gap, right? And so the idea was to really have a desire to have a much more diverse set of submissions. And there was a sort of sense that people may have good ideas, but they didn't know whether or not to put them in the process. They didn't understand how to do that. And it was intimidating. And most inventors were men. So going back to Gail's sort of point about her daughter having choices, but she's going to go where, there are other people who are women and it feels more comfortable, right? So there was this sense that there was the need for a mentorship program. Next slide, please. So what happened is we were able to study these cohorts over a period of time. So the program would be set up, you would be paired or put into a mentor pod, you would get sort of intensive instruction for a period of time, and then you're allowed to kind of go back in the firm. And of course, it's resource intensive to do this, but what was really exciting is to see that there were these spillovers, that people who weren't mentored also got benefited from this. Right. And so that we saw, yes, the mentored workers increase their innovative output, not only during the program and right after it, but in the long term. right? So this was an investment that would pay off for a long time. And it wasn't a long-term program. It was only 6 months. But we saw, again, that it benefited everybody, but especially those from underrepresented groups. It benefited non-mentored workers. And then we did survey work separately. And we wanted to understand, well, how did this work? What really helped? And it was really about that knowledge transmission around what is this process? Like, how do you actually engage in patenting, as well as having a broader professional work, right? Network that people you could collaborate with, you could ask about questions about, and finally increase confidence. I think there's still, go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. I love this last point on scalability, Colleen, like even low quality mentors delivered gains, because this is something, I'm incredibly intentional about is sponsorship, mentorship, coaches. What it does is it calls that person in. And so often, just the invitation and the act of saying, you can take these steps shows that person a path they didn't know existed before.
Right. And so those small interventions can still add up. It doesn't have to be, I mean, of course, we want to have, a mentor like Lena who meets with us every week and also, cares about what we're going through and sort of talks to us and takes me to lunch. But even, potentially the other mentors, even if they're not as present, potentially like on that one question, they can be very instructive. And so it doesn't have to be what was very surprising. And I think a really nice finding for us is that you didn't have to be the most engaged mentor to still have an impact. Next slide, please. So anyway, I won't go through all of this, but we had essentially, I guess it was 2 to 4 months rather than 6. I think there were some earlier cohorts that might have been longer, but it's just several hours of work per week of talking about how do we actually identify a problem that we might work on together, how do we draft a solution, and how do we submit something. So it was tied into actually going through and doing something tangible, right? And so that gave it focus, and that gave it scalability as well, because there was a format. It wasn't just merely process driven. It was also outcome focused, like let's drive towards something. So you see again the mentee profile. It was 50 to 90% female. It was focused on female inventors, but it was open to all, and people that were fairly junior, right? And so this is 7 cohorts, 633 mentees. And so if again compare 633 to 25,000, this is a very small program within a very large firm. And so the question is, does this actually move the needle? I'm going to go to the next slide. You could just run through the.
Not clicking, trying to.
Basically, I can just mention that we are given data on the universe of the company's submissions. So we could actually see what was provided in the IDFs. And then we kind of saw the demographics of the team, and we built this data set. So that's kind of just a little bit about the methodology. If you go to the next slide. What we saw is this kind of spike in IDFs, right? And so, of course, you see in the actual mentorship program itself, there was an inventor submission. But then we saw persistently continued IDFs, right? And so that's significant. It was, sort of above the level, but before the treatment, right, people on average were not submitting much. We had, 0.1 or something like along those lines. And then after the mentorship program, you saw this kind of this kind of submission rate. Next slide, please. These are just, I think, additional slides with a lot of numbers on them, but as you kind of go through them, you'll see that when we kind of dug into the data, we saw that women and URMs benefited more, that the mentor quality did matter, right, in terms of the intensity and the quality of it. But you ultimately, if you go to the next slide, still saw effects and and benefits. And if you go to the next slide, that non-mentored collaborators were also benefiting, right? So this kind of full sample we're seeing is still having some benefit depending on which of the models you use, and that these were larger and more precise in male and non-URM workers. So kind of this focus on, ironically, right? You kind of think about diversity as focusing on specifically just one population, but because of these spillovers, you saw that male and non-URM workers were able to also benefit very much from this very targeted program. Next slide, please. What did this mean? This also meant not only more IDFs and disclosures, people kind of getting off the bench, as Kathy Vidal would say, and participating, but also improvements in sentiment and retention. This is based on some of the survey work that we did and some of the other data sets we looked at. So if we go to the kind of bottom line, right, we want to know what is the worth to the firm, right, this investment. So if we kind of look at what is the value of that additional patent, right? Because we have now all these new ideas that are in there that wouldn't have been there otherwise. How do we come up with it? We could see that the mentor's time, if you want to sort of measure it, would come up to about $750,000 versus if you look at the actual direct gain, it's about double that. So a pretty high ROI in actually getting new ideas out there and this being a very worthwhile process. So the question is like, well, why isn't everybody doing this, right? Because it seems to work, and you would think that the private sector market would signal this. But there are a lot of challenges, right? Behavioral and cultural biases exist, and this inhibits people from doing things that are maybe uncomfortable, right? It's kind of coming up with this grouping, putting this program together. There are costs that are associated with that, and culturally, it may not feel like it fits. And then, sort of this question of cultural initiatives are not always ones that are embraced by the leadership. So this comes again back to what are the messages you're getting from the top? How much is this a priority? If you want to go for it, it's possible, but a lot of times there can be sort of different perspectives that are not, the leaderships that's not effective, or investment kind of purviews that are not going to be looking at this long-term interest, right? This is an investment you make that pays for a very long time. So I think the main thing we want to say is like, we would love to collaborate with anybody who has programs like this so we can evaluate them, share this information. And I'd love to hear from others about, sort of open questions or things that you see might be comparable in law to evaluate. Because again, we've had a lot of effort on mentoring in the law, but I don't think we necessarily know how valuable it is. And now that we're in this, new era where diversity is under attack, I think it's more important than ever to really focus on this ROI and what's really in it for the firm. But we are pleased to kind of get these results and be able to share them with this group today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that, Colleen. It really stands out for me that what we're seeing here is this change, fear of change, right? That people don't want to do this because they are afraid of giving to one group or this perception of bias, when in fact we see that everyone benefits from creating systems and structures in place that will increase engagement. Obvious diverse perspectives, where that might be a trigger to someone, we can say multiple perspectives, right? So I'm not attached to that language if it causes trouble for
Oh,
someone.
yeah, I'm not attached to the language either. I just want to know, like, because we're starting a mentorship program at the PTAB bar, and I'm also working with Adapt Legal to we do a mentorship program there too. So we're just trying to navigate the waters of the law without trying to cross it.
Gail, Lena, we just have a couple minutes. Oh, we're at time actually. Are there any final thoughts on, I didn't realize that went by so quickly, sorry. Are there any final thoughts on advice you can offer to others to create an effective mentoring system, or something that you might like to now add to what you're doing because of this conversation?
So one thing, and it might not be like a direct answer to that question. I think one thing that's important to discuss in the context of fostering women in law firms is this flexible time, flexible work hours. And I don't think we really discussed that here, but I think it's hugely important in supporting women, working moms, basically.
And I think for me, the best thing and the thing that I try to do most is lead by example. As have a very busy job, but I have a pretty good number of mentees and making the time. And people who work for me see that I do that, and then they go ahead and do that, and it spreads. And so, that's what I've always tried to do, is if you lead by example, and then others hopefully will follow.
Yeah, I'll put a final plug in. Jason did put his email into the chat, and
Chat and share what you've seen or questions you have about developing an effective mentoring. I would love to receive that feedback so that we can create something more around what's possible in the space of advancing all women.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
You.